So in this video, we'll be picking up where we left off in the last video on Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. And that is going to be on Chapter 12. We will be having another gift opening in this video. On page 136 is the next gift. I have the little item right here. It's in a nice little square box. I wonder what it's going to be. I'm so excited. So we will see. Without further ado, here's Reading by Ree. Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco, Chapter 12. Family Ties. Wadsworth Residence, Belgrave Square, 13 September 1888. Nearly 2 hours and several dainty ahems of approval later, my aunt finally retired to bed, satisfied she'd sown inappropriateness from me one stitch at a time. It now didn't seem to bother her I'd found a murdered man, so long as I'd created pretty violets and swirling vines to make up for breaking social taboos. She'd also insisted on having my newest maid add a bit more powder and polish to my after-bath routine. When I'd argued that it was unnecessary, I could do fine on my own, she crossed herself and refilled her wine, instructing the maid to attend to my beauty needs each day from there on out. I resisted the urge to wipe the excess kohl from my eyes, especially when Thomas kept tossing smug glances my way. I enjoyed applying makeup as any other girl my age would, only I did so with a lighter hand. Police say a gear was used to slash his throat open. Thomas fidgeted in his seat in our drawing room. I refused to let him smoke in the house, and he was more twitchy than usual while filling me in on the investigation. He slid one of Uncle's medical journals over to me, his fingers lingering a bit near mine before fiddling with his own notebook. How on earth did someone do that much damage with a simple gear? I asked, moving around in my own chair with discomfort. It was strange having Thomas in my home without supervision, even though we'd spent time roaming London and reading by ourselves, and my aunt and cousin were only a few floors above us. I figured once we started discussing the murder, things would become less awkward, but that was proving to be another falsehood. Turning something like that into a weapon isn't hard. He lifted his teacup, but didn't sip before setting it down again, his gaze snagging on mine. It's made of metal, and it has sharp ends. Any madman or drunk can manage killing someone with it. I myself have sharpened quite a few. I did not have the mental energy to ask why he had experience or need to sharpen gears. Letting that slide, I kept my focus on the case, drumming my fingers along the journal. At the first two murders, there were gears. It's a bit too much of a coincidence to be unrelated to our investigation, wouldn't you agree? Dear Wadsworth, your association with me is growing more beneficial by the hour. Your intelligence is quite attractive, Thomas said, raising his brows suggestively and taking in my newly plaited hair. Plaited? Plaited. Let's have some wine and dance inappropriately. You've already dressed the part for me. Let's take advantage. He offered his hand, palm up, a wicked grin set upon his face. Thomas, please. I batted his hand away, blushing furiously. Dancing with Thomas alone without a chaperone would be scandalous, and was far too tempting. Plus, it wouldn't solve this mystery any faster, I reasoned. Aunt Amelia would perish on the spot if she walked in on such impropriety. Her untimely end would excuse you from any more embroidery lessons, would it not? Perhaps we should skip the dancing and passionately embrace instead. Thomas! I chided. I told myself the sooner we discovered who the murderer was, the sooner I'd be rid of Thomas Cresswell and his devious ways. We'd be kissing in back alleys before I knew it. Then my reputation would truly be in the gutter. I didn't appreciate the twinge of disappointment I felt at the thought of not spending as much time with him. "Very well, then." Thomas leaned back, sighing. "I believe someone was spying on us in the shipyard. They must have overheard us talking about Mr. Dunlap. It's the only logical conclusion that works. If we can identify him, I'm positive we'll have found our murderer." "And if I had a crown, I'd be queen," I said, unable to stop myself. "Honestly, Thomas, how ridiculous a statement. If... We need something a bit more secure than a simple if we're to stop a vicious murderer." The irony of my last statement was not lost on Thomas. A slow smile crept across his mouth as he leaned forward, our faces dangerously close. "If I purchased a crown, would you run around Buckingham Palace in nothing but your petticoats, demanding the guards let you through?" "Be serious," I admonished him, but not before laughing at the absurdity of the image. "Can you picture such a thing? I'd be thrown into the tower, and they'd have the key tossed in the Thames for good measure. Good riddance, indeed." "Fear not. I'd find ways of springing you from the Tower prison, fair lady." I shook my head. "Wonderful. You'll end up in the next cell, dooming us both." Thomas laughed heartily for a few beats, his gaze straying to my lips and staying there. I swallowed, suddenly remembering we were alone and I couldn't find one good reason why I shouldn't kiss him. I was already trouble in society's eyes, might as well embrace my role and have a bit of adventure in the process. Cousin Liza would demand every last detail. A bit of gossip might be fun. Checking my reaction, he slowly closed the distance between us, my pulse quickening as his expression shifted to a sweet unguardedness. Yes, I thought. This was right. I couldn't think of a more perfect first kiss. A clattering noise from the kitchen downstairs broke the spell. He abruptly sat straighter in his chair, flipping the notebook open with intense interest, the temperature in the room chilled at least 20 degrees. I blinked at how quickly he shut himself off. I'd half a mind to have the fire made in here, not that it'd help his frigid demeanor. Straightening my shoulders, I collected my thoughts. Well then, I could be just as fickle as Thomas, if that's how he wanted our association to be. We needn't laugh or even be friends. In fact, I should never have warmed to him to begin with. I couldn't believe how close I'd been to kissing him, deplorable beast that he was. Though, if I were truly being honest with myself, I would admit it was nice having an acquaintance as abnormal in society's eyes as I was. Father hadn't allowed friends into our home while we were growing up, with influenzas and potential pox contaminations, so I'd never had a best friend before and missed out on those sorts of relationships. Even with all Father's efforts, disease still found its way into our home. He hadn't realized how difficult it would make things once I was old enough to accept my own invitations for tea. Now I needed my aunt and cousin to come in and make friends for me. I couldn't be vexed with Father, though. He did the best he could, even when his best was detrimental. "I'll take that." I snatched another journal from Thomas's side of the table. It seemed he'd grabbed nearly all of Uncle's journals before arriving here and was hoarding them along with his manners. He didn't bother lifting his head from his own work. I set my jaw and reread the same few sentences, forcing my brain to find a connection between the victims. 2 prostitutes, Miss Smith, and a coachman turned sailor. Most of whom had a connection to Father, I realized with a start. The only person who couldn't be traced to him was Miss Annie Chapman, and she'd been slain in the most brutal manner. Everything pointed to the fact that Miss Chapman didn't know her killer, but the others likely did. I swallowed hard, knowing there was something we needed to do immediately. "Excuse me." I stood, gathering my skirts like silent witnesses, and headed out the door without waiting for Thomas to stand. If he wanted to treat me so coolly, then I'd show him the same lack of respect. I needed no man to empower me. I had my father to thank for that much. His absence in most everyday things had prepared me well enough to stand on my own. Walking swiftly down the hallway, I paused, listening to sounds of voices drifting up from ornate metal vents in the floor. Once I reached my father's study, I halted to the sound of someone knocking at the front door. Drat! I crept back down the hall and slipped into the well-lit drawing-room, while the first footman greeted the caller. The last thing I needed was to get caught rummaging through Father's things. But suddenly recalling something Thornley mentioned had my mind spinning with new questions. Thomas continued to pore over his notes. I paid him little attention, straining to hear who was calling on us at this hour. Footsteps approached, and I pretended to lose myself in reading. The first footman entered the room, waiting for my acknowledgment. I looked up, eyes innocent and wide. "Yes, Kane?" "There's a Mr. Alberts here to see you, Miss Audrey Rose. Says he works for your uncle and brings an urgent message. He apologizes for the late hour. Shall I send him away?" I shook my head. It's not like Uncle to send someone over unless it's important, especially if Father intercepted any correspondence he'd want to keep private. Something must have happened. Perhaps he found a link to the crimes and couldn't wait until morning, or maybe he discovered our murderer's identity. Anticipation raced through my core, erasing all else from my thoughts. "Send him in straight away, please." The footman disappeared, emerging again with my uncle's servant in tow. The man gripped a worn derby hat, nervously twisting the brim round and round, looking as if he'd just encountered something awful. My heart turned to lead, dully thudding in my chest. Perhaps he was simply afraid of encountering my father. Uncle certainly barked loud enough over the last few years about his cruel brother, the miserable Lord Edmund Wadsworth, who hid his darkness behind his pompous title. I hoped that was the cause of his anxiety. "You have a message from my uncle?" He nodded, throwing glances toward Thomas as he did so, his unease growing. "Yes, Miss Wadsworth. It's something terrible, I'm afraid." Uncle's servant wrung his hat until I was convinced it'd be torn in half. "Do speak freely, Mr. Alberts," I said. "What news do you have of my uncle?" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple a bobbing buoy in his throat. "He's been arrested, miss. Scotland Yard's taken him away in a Black Maria and everything. Told us he's the one responsible for them deaths in Whitechapel. Said he's gone mad." He paused, steeling himself against the rest of his news. "A witness come by and identified him. Said he's the one she's seen skulking about the murder. Superintendent said they're taking everyone suspicious in on account of how awful them ladies were cut up." Notes Thomas had begun scribbling slipped through his fingers, the pages fluttering to the ground like ash after a fire. "What kind of nonsense is this?" Albert shook his head, dropping his gaze to the floor, a tremor going through the entire length of his body. "They're rummaging through his laboratory right now, looking for more evidence to keep him locked away. Say it's only a matter of time before he's found guilty and executed. They say he's Leather Apron." "Kane, please fetch my coat." My attention shifted to Thomas, who was momentarily taken off guard, his mouth hanging wide and his eyes blinking disbelief away. We needed to get to Uncle's laboratory now, before they destroyed his life and all his research. "Alberts, thank you for informing us of this." "Politeness be damned, Wadsworth." "Politeness be damned, Wadsworth," Thomas bellowed, quickly moving across the room and into the hall. "Let's hurry while there's still a laboratory to save. You!" He pointed at the second footman lingering in the hall. "Ready the hansom cab, as if your very soul depends on its velocity." He grabbed my overcoat from Kane, offering to place it round my shoulders, but I yanked it from his grasp. When a second footman hadn't moved, I nodded at him. "Please do as Mr. Cresswell has so rudely demanded." Thomas snorted as the footman scampered off to do my bidding. "Oh, yes, I'm the villain. Your uncle is being hauled off. Oh, yes, I'm the villain. Your uncle's being hauled off, his scientific findings most likely being destroyed by barbarians, yet I'm the rude one. That makes perfect sense." "You're infuriatingly rude. Being boorish and snapping at people won't get the job done any quicker, you know." I pulled my coat on and fastened the buttons with deft fingers. "We wouldn't still be waiting here for the carriage if you'd asked them nicely to fetch it." "Any other words of wisdom I should take into consideration, my dove?" he asked flatly. "Yes, as a matter of fact. It wouldn't kill you to be kinder to people. Who knows?" I said, tossing my hands in the air. "Maybe you'd finally find someone who could tolerate you. And anyway, how twisted your first concern is of the lab, and not my uncle's life. Your priorities are hopelessly in disarray." "Perhaps I don't want any friends," he said, moving toward the front door. "Perhaps I am content with speaking the way I do and care only what your opinion of me is. My first concern is not of your uncle's laboratory. It's of their reason for taking him in." Thomas rubbed his forehead. "Thus far, they've arrested 4 other men I can think of, for the offense of drinking too much and flashing a knife. My concern is whether they've taken him to a workhouse or to an asylum." "Neither is pleasant." "True," Thomas said, "but he's less likely to be dosed with tonic in a workhouse." In the next moment, our sleek, handsome carriage pulled around the front of my house, the single black horse looking dangerous. The beast snorted, sending puffs of steam into the already foggy evening. I hoisted myself into the carriage, not bothering to wait for Thomas or the coachman to help. We needed to hurry. There was no telling how much damage the police were actually doing to Uncle's precious work, and if what Thomas said was true regarding the asylum, I couldn't finish the thought. Thomas hopped into the small enclosure, his attention riveted on the road ahead of us, the muscles in his jaw tense. I couldn't tell if he was worried about Uncle or upset I'd insulted him. Perhaps it was a bit of both. The coachman cracked the whip and we were off, flying through the streets at a glorious fast pace. We wove in and around larger horse-drawn carriages moving as agilely as a panther through the urban tangle of London streets. In what felt like mere minutes, we were pulling up to Uncle's home in Highgate. I leapt from the cab, my skirts adding bulk and weight to my already heavy footsteps. Police filed in and out of Uncle's home, removing boxes of paperwork. I ran up to a young man who seemed to be in charge. "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded, hoping I might shame them into stopping, if only for a little while. "Have you no respect for a man who's assisted in finding criminals most of his life? What could you possibly want with my uncle?" The constable had the good grace to blush, but stuck his impressive chest out a bit more when Thomas ambled up the steps, an obnoxious swagger in his stride. The constable turned his attention back on me, his light eyes showing a hint of remorse. No salty tears spilled from those oceanic blues, though. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Wadsworth," he said. "If it were my decision alone, I'd send everyone on their way. Believe me when I say I've got nothing against your uncle." He smiled shyly, something strangely out of character for a man who had the build and confidence of an Olympian. "In fact, I've always admired the sort of work he's done. Orders came from high up, though, and I can't ignore them, even if I wanted to." It was hard to imagine someone who spoke so well choosing the life of a simple policeman. I narrowed my eyes, noticing the extra decorations on his uniform. He was a high-ranking officer, then. He was no simple policeman. He was of nobility to hold such an esteemed office at his young age. My gaze traveled back up to his face. The fine bones and sharp angles of his cheeks and square chin made him quite handsome. He was most certainly high-born. Facially, he looked like a younger, more handsome version of Prince Albert Victor, sans mustache. What did you say your name was?" I asked. Thomas rolled his eyes. "He didn't, Wadsworth. But you already knew that. Get on with your flirtations so we might get on with our actual purpose for being here." I glared at Thomas, but the young man paid him no mind. "I apologize for my rudeness, miss. I'm Superintendent William Blackburn. I'm responsible for the 480 constables here in Highgate." His name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place where I'd heard it. Perhaps I'd read it in some paper with connection to our murders. Thomas interrupted my muddied thoughts. "Seems you've employed every last one of them to trample through this home," he muttered, shoving aside an officer before marching in to assess the situation himself. I wanted to strangle him for being so rude. Superintendent Blackburn might be able to give us some answers we'd otherwise not be privy to. For all his superior intelligence, Thomas could be downright obtuse when it came to dealing with people. If I had to befriend the devil in order to help Uncle, so be it. I found myself apologizing. "He's a little high-spirited. Please forgive his impolite behavior. He can be quite—" I trailed off. Thomas Cresswell was not charming to anyone other than me occasionally, nor was he polite on a good day. Mother would have instructed me to not utter a word when a kind one couldn't be discovered, so that's precisely what I did. Superintendent Blackbird gave me a sheepish grin and offered his arm. I hesitated for only a moment before looping mine through his. "Play nice, Audrey Rose," I reminded myself. "I'll escort you inside and try my best to explain the reason behind your uncle's arrest." He paused and looked around before leaning close, an almost familiar scent lingering on his skin. "I'm afraid it doesn't look very good for him, miss." Okay, that was the end of Chapter 12. We are now starting Chapter 13. We are super close to page 136. And since it is in the middle, I think... Oh, well, it's a short chapter. I'll be able to finish the chapter before opening the gift, so yay! Chapter 13. Blueprints and Bloody Bolts. Bloody Bolts. Yep. Dr. Jonathan Wadsworth Laboratory, Highgate, 13 September 1888. Walking into Uncle's basement laboratory with uninvited guests rummaging about like scavengers was its own nightmare, plucking at the ligaments between my bones. Uncle's books, his notes, his journals were all painfully absent. It felt like one of my ribs had been sawed off, leaving me both gasping for breath and missing a piece of myself all at once. Letting go of Blackburn's arm, I slowly turned in place, my eyes two unbelieving orbs in my head. If this was a dream, I hoped to wake from its dreadfulness soon. I had a terrible feeling, however, that this was only the beginning of a series of horrendous nightmares. The specimen jars were the only items that remained untouched, the dull, preserved eyes watching the chaos with silent judgment. Oh, how I wished I could be like those dead, unfeeling things now. Anything would be better than the reality I was standing in. My refuge all these months was destroyed in a few hours by the hands of men who couldn't care less about this sort of work. Combined with his history of dissection and medical knowledge worked against him. Superintendent Blackburn was saying, but I couldn't concentrate on his words. Thank heavens Uncle wasn't here. His heart would be sheared in half. I watched helplessly as an officer wrestled a large gilded tomb Uncle had been stroking a few short days ago from the shelf, placing it in a box as if it were a rabid animal ready to snap at him, if only that could happen. He removed a small box Uncle kept in his desk, the lid slipping off. Bolts and screws clattered to the ground, halting the investigation. The officer bent to retrieve the items, a look of shock and disgust as he rose, holding them up for the superintendent to see. The bolts were covered in a rusty crimson that could only be one thing. My own blood ceased to circulate as my eyes met Thomas's startled gaze from across the room. "I need to speak with Uncle. I can explain. Someone placed a chair next to me, and I plopped into it straight away. It was as if the oxygen had been suctioned from the laboratory with a new steam-powered device I'd seen advertised across London. What was Uncle thinking, stealing evidence? Those bolts were from the murder scenes and belonged to Scotland Yard. Uncle had inadvertently placed himself as the main suspect, and I had no idea how to assist him or who to even turn to for help. Father, though he had the right connections, would rather see his brother hang than assist him in any way. Nathaniel, though, he'd want to help, if only for my sake. Most likely wouldn't do anything to anger Father or cause an even greater scandal than was bound to fall upon the Wadsworth name, especially something of this magnitude, sure to hit the papers once reporters caught its scent. Undoubtedly, Aunt Amelia would throw lavish parties and attend daily services, hoping to distract people from her association with her disgraced brother. Then there was Grandmamma. She had no ties to Father's side of the family, therefore wouldn't feel obligated to get involved, not out of maliciousness, but out of a strong dislike for Wadsworth men in general. Grandmamma openly blamed Father for Mother's illness, and made it very clear that if a Wadsworth were looking out at a crowd, ready to swing for their crimes, I'd be front and center, watching and cheering, before handing out homemade Bundi Lado treats to everyone in attendance. Okay, that's a thing that I don't know. Never heard of. Don't know what that is. If anybody does, please leave it to tell me what it is and leave it in a comment below. Okay. Bundi Ladu treats or Bondi Bonodi, whatever. Each time we sent correspondence, she searched for excuses to have my bags packed and passage paid to visit her in New York. This would be perfect. There was no way I'd leave London now. Ransack the laboratory if you must. Oh, ransack the laboratory if you must, Blackburn said to an officer. Just do it carefully. That snapped me from my revere. I glared at the superintendent, only partially aware of Thomas throwing a fit over one journal in particular, his. You must be mad. I won't hand over my property. Superintendent Blackburn knelt in front of me, his look no longer light. I stared at the pale strands of his hair. Unlike my brother's careful cut, his hair was too wild to be tamed, curling around his temples like serpents. How fitting for such a cold-blooded monster. I know it's a lot to absorb at once, Miss Wadsworth, but I'm terribly afraid there's more. He motioned for the officer fighting with Thomas to give up the one journal since Thomas had brought it into the house with us, and it hadn't been part of their inquest. We've got witnesses who've stepped forth, placing someone fitting your uncle's description at the scene of the last two crimes. My attention finally jolted back to reality. I stared at Superintendent Blackburn as if he were the mad one. Oh, really? Exactly how many men in London fit my uncle's description? I asked. I can count at least 10 off the top of my head, one of them being the Queen's grandson, Prince Albert Victor Edward. What? Will you say the Duke of... Oh. I can count at least 10 off the top of my head, one of them being the Queen's grandson, Prince Albert Victor Edward. What? Will you say the Duke of Clarence and Avondale is involved in these murders next? I'm sure the Queen would love that. As a matter of fact, I squinted at him. You look as if you could be the Duke's younger brother yourself. Might you be involved? Superintendent Blackburn cringed at my inappropriate criticism of his inquest involving the second in line to the throne and himself. I took a deep breath, trying for calmness. I'd be of no use to anyone if I, too, were taken away in a Black Maria on suspicion of being a traitor to the crown. I steadied my voice. Surely that's not the reason you've arrested him. You seem much too smart a young man to arrest someone on hearsay, Superintendent. Blackburn shook his head. I do apologize for passing along the unpleasant news, miss. I am truly sorry. He shifted on his feet, trying to maintain his balance while still perched on the ground before me. We've also found some rather disturbing diagrams and drawings of these mechanisms, best described as... He paused, the tips of his ears turning a slight pink. I motioned for him to get on with it. Forgive me, I didn't want to overstep my bounds. But they appear to be torture devices. Some ideas fit with mechanical parts Scotland Yard found at the murder scenes. They believe only someone with an intimate knowledge of how the crime would be able to construct such atrocities. As I said earlier, your uncle possesses such knowledge. Now we've got drawings of similar devices found in his laboratory. He nodded toward the officer who just located the hidden bolts. Then there's the matter of those parts. You're an intelligent girl. I'm sure you can deduce what the dark substance is without my spelling it out. I truly want to believe your uncle's innocent. There are all these things saying otherwise. I cannot ignore what's laid out before me, even if I want to. The public wants this to be over. I've heard there are at least 4 men in custody for the crimes, I said, hoping to shed doubt on their case. 2 of whom are in asylums. Surely that works in Uncle's favor. They all can't be guilty. We simply cannot take any chances. He'll be looked after in Bethlehem Royal Hospital, I assure you, Miss Wadsworth. What? I couldn't believe this was happening. I gathered my enraged thoughts, corralling them into a cage, willing them to be tamed, maintaining a sense of serenity, Maintaining a sense of serenity was what I needed to do, but it was hard when all I longed to do was shake these men from their short-sighted stupor. Bethlehem Royal Hospital, known to most everyone as Bedlam, was horrendous. Uncle could not stay there. "You must believe me," I whispered, angry tears burning my eyes. "I know how it looks, but I assure you my uncle is an innocent man. He's brilliant, and shouldn't be punished for finding the right avenue to search. He lives and breathes a case when he's involved with it. I'm sure he's got plenty of good reason to be in possession of those items. He probably did those sketches for attending the scene. You simply need ask him. This is how he works. You must know that." Superintendent Blackburn gave me a pitying look. I'd find no help here. He was duty sworn, and that was that. Blackburn wouldn't release my uncle based on his denial of being involved alone. He'd need proof, even if it came wrapped in another body shroud. I clamped my mouth shut and stood. If I stayed a moment longer, I was in danger of being hauled off to Bedlam myself. Uncle might be innocent, but I'd definitely be guilty of slapping some sense into these brutes. With my parasol, if need be, I motioned to Thomas, who was still glaring at the police collectively, then swept from the room like a storm, rushing through the streets, cleansing all the grit in a mad downpour. To hell with them all. Okay, that was the end of chapter 13. Yay! Oh my goodness, we get to open a gift now. Yay! Okie dokie, gift. We're going to be opening the gift that's supposed to be on the end of page 136. I know we skipped it, but I wanted to finish the chapter since it was a short one. Okie dokie. Let's see what it is. I wonder what it is. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, I had to switch my position. My foot was starting to hurt. Sheesh, my mom always uses so much tape. Because it was my mom who created this. My mom and my dad created these book boxes for me. Oh my goodness. Okay. Oh, still can't get it. Okay. There we go. Oh, it's a little box. Look how cute. Oh, there's something in it. Oh, it's kind of heavy. The box is gorgeous. Cute. So guys, this is what we have. We have some rusty, oh dear, I'm trying to get you to see them. I don't want to touch them though. Some rusty, okay, good. Bits and bolts and things. I hope you can see them. Try to bring them a little closer so you can kind of see. And they are kind of rusty with like reddish color. And that's what that is. That's so cute. I love it. So, let's see, 136. He removed a small box Uncle kept in his desk. The lid is slipping off. Bolts and screws clattered to the ground. So, yep, there are bolts and screws in this box. Oh, they're so good. I love my mom and dad. They do so amazing with this. Oh, so cute. Okay, so that's it for this. We will pick back up on chapter 14 in the next book, or next video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, go ahead and do so. If you already are, thank you so much, and I hope you're enjoying these videos. Leave me a comment below if you have, anything to say, or if you, have any, if you're liking the book, whatever. Hit the thumbs up if you like this video, and hit the notification bell so you can keep getting wonderful updates and see more gifts. Let's see, so the next gift will be on page 191. Wonder where that is. Seems probably kind of far. Oh, yeah. We'll probably be, oh yeah, we'll have done probably a video or two before we can get to the next one, because it's kind of thick. So, alright, that's it. Till next time, bye!